Over time, the malevolent aspect of Saturn worship developed into some pretty dark and dangerous cults. Focused on the destructive characteristics of Saturn, these cults united under a common objective to take over the world and fashion it in their own image. Throughout the Piscean age, ruled by Jupiter, many of these Saturn cults were thrown out of sovereign nations due to their anti-Christian practices. 109 countries banished various expressions of this cult, forbidding them from ever returning. However, as the Piscean age progressed, and each mini-epoch or division of the age came into fruition, the Saturn cult entered the picture once more. We can clearly see in our divisions of time of the 2160-year Piscean age that Saturn becomes prominent throughout the 16th and 19th centuries. Here we see Kronos' influence with the appearance of various kinds of chronometers. The Saturn cult once more gears up for a major push for power and control. This time the target was England.
Hi, Mike King, realnewsandhistory.com, and this is episode 2 of the Rise and Fall of the New World Order Cabal. Make sure you like this video and follow me on Rumble and hit the share button and share it far and wide. So, we want to start the beginning of this story, not in 1776, where usually the story begins with the founding of the Illuminati. Although that was a very significant event, there's something that occurred more than a century earlier in England, which in the grander scheme of things is far more significant. And so we need to talk about the English Civil War and the English Revolution, which came out of it. This was a period of political tumult in England. It lasted about 35 years, and it culminated with a fundamental transformation of the British monarchy. And it was then that the true Jewish cabal began to get its hooks into the British Empire. So let's go back to 1649, in the English Civil War. That is King Charles I, and he's married to a French Catholic woman. Although he is nominally Protestant, some of his enemies accuse him of being a secret Catholic. Okay? And the point of contention at that time was between King Charles and the Parliament. King Charles was still pretty much an absolute monarch, and the Parliament wanted him to yield some of his power to the Parliament. And the Parliament, the most vocal and turned out to be violent faction of the Parliament was the Puritans. As the same bunch that were the early settlers to the colonies, the American colonies, the Pilgrims and the Mayflower and such. And the leader of the Puritan faction was a man named Oliver Cromwell. And the Civil War, which was funded by wealthy Jews out of Amsterdam. I should mention at this time, the Jews were not allowed in England. And there were some who practiced their faith secretly, but they had been banished in the 1200s due to the usual accusations, the money lending, the usury. There was a case where a young boy was abducted, a young Christian boy, William of Norwich, and he was ritually murdered, etc. So they had been banished for centuries. But Cromwell is being funded now by the Jews of Amsterdam. They want back in. because Britain is already on its way to becoming a global empire. A lot of money, a lot of political power to be had. So he leads the uprising, and King Charles is eventually captured, and he is executed by Cromwell, and a few others gave the order to execute the king. So that was a big shock to people back then. And Cromwell takes the title Lord Protector of England, and he assumes dominion over Scotland and Ireland, and he's a real brute. And one of the things he does early on is he lifts the banishment on the Jews, and they start coming back into London. They had financed him. He unleashes a wave of tyranny against the Catholic population of England, but especially Ireland. He really takes it to him hard. And you see, in some of his own writings, he talks about delivering the Lord's justice and killing these Irish friars and priests. He was a real lunatic, and he was such a tyrant, he came to be hated even by many of the Protestants who had initially supported the revolution. He banned Christmas, for example. So you see, these Puritans were really oddballs. They were real hardcore Old Testament fanatics. But he loved the Jews. He despised Catholics, but he loved the Jews. So there's Cromwell, and there's a headline from a Jewish publication: "Display reveals Cromwell's role in the readmission of Jews." So that's something that's very important, and they kind of commemorate it to this day, their readmission into Great Britain. Here's a headline from the Jewish Virtual Library: "Cromwell's favorable attitude toward the Jews was so marked that, according to his enemies, the Jews regarded them as their Messiah." Here's another headline from a Jewish author: "The strange tale of Oliver Cromwell's unlikely partnership with a Jew." And this would have been his main man here, Manasseh ben Israel. I'm going to read you an excerpt here. In 1655, Rabbi Manasseh ben Israel arrived in London from Amsterdam. His purpose was to petition Oliver Cromwell concerning the return of the Jews to England. "I am not come to make any disturbance, but only to live with my nation in the fear of the Lord, under the shadow of your protection, while we expect with you the hope of Israel to be revealed." And Sigmund Freud, by the way, named one of his sons Oliver, in gratitude for Oliver Cromwell. So the Jewish community adored Cromwell, and the feeling was mutual. They both hated the Catholics. The Crescent City Jewish News of New Orleans, I found this interesting article. The headline is "The Almost Jewish Puritans," and they truly were in their religious practice, in their attitude. They were a lot like the modern-day Christian Zionist Schofield Bible fanatics. But the author writes, in Bible and Sword, famed historian Barbara Tuchman took my vague suspicions that our American forefathers were so Jewish that you wonder why the old pictures don't show them in yarmulke. Historians are well aware of this, although most of us Jews are not. I was spellbound by Tuchman's book. Fleeing persecution, the Puritans saw themselves as the 16th century Israelites. They named their kids Abraham, Sarah, Isaac, and Rebecca. Do you know that the seals of Yale and Harvard are in Hebrew, of all things? They paid respect to the Hebrew language that they refused to the language of their own Gospels. Tuchman tells us that Macaulay, the greatest of English historians, rants about their Hebraic leanings. They flew the flag of Moses and culturally waged war with Episcopal Christianity. Another historian, Cunningham, sums it up neatly. The general tendency of Puritanism was to discard Christian morality and substitute Jewish habits in its stead. America's roots, moderately nurtured by Judaism, are ours. The hatred of their ruler, King James, led them to the love of republicanism, and the God of the Puritans was the thundering God of Exodus, not the gentle deity who communed with Jesus. So, and that's the truth. They're really hardcore fanatical when you think, the story of the Salem witch trials, right? They would torture these women. They accused them of being witches, just hardcore fanatics. And they got along famously with the Jewish element that wanted to get back into Britain. And that's why they funded Cromwell. Now, eventually Cromwell dies. They say he died of malaria, but he had his enemies. Maybe he was poisoned, who knows. And after Cromwell died, his son, Robert Cromwell, became the Lord Protector. But by that time, the Puritans, or Cromwell's bunch, they were so hated by regular Protestants. Banning Christmas, banning entertainment, just hardcore Old Testament fanatic, that there was, they brought back the king, or the son of the king, Charles II. And he was also married to a Catholic woman. But that was okay. He was, he didn't make any efforts to convert England back to Catholicism. He tried to be very tolerant. That's King Charles II. Okay, so his father was beheaded by Cromwell. Cromwell dies, and now the monarchy is restored by Charles II. And although he was very tolerant and forgiving of his enemies during the Civil War, he wanted to reconcile and heal the country. As far as Cromwell was concerned, that he could not forgive. Of course, Cromwell was dead already, but he ordered his body to be dug up and his head placed on a pike. So it was a mock execution of Cromwell after the fact, for revenge for having murdered his father, King Charles I. And that's 1861. Cromwell was dug up and hanged in effigy or placed on a stake. 1661, rather. 1665, a plague hits London. The Great Plague of London. It was horrific. It was just like the Black Death plagues that had plagued the continental Europe. It's estimated that 100,000 Londoners died, which represents about 20% of the population. And there was a Jewish quarter at that time, and you have to understand a bit of history. Historically, whenever these plagues broke out, Jews were often blamed for poisoning wells, and there's compelling evidence that, at least in some cases, that is what caused the Black Death. And people would go and burn their villages, and then they would be expelled. So it's awful strange. Not long after coming back into the country, after Cromwell let them in, now there's a plague in England. And there's really no record of Jewish deaths. Now, they say it's because they weren't part of the Anglican Church, so the deaths aren't recorded. Who knows? But it's a very odd timing, especially given that they had just been let back into England, and given that England is going through all of this revolutionary tumult. So that was 1865. Horrific. If you've ever heard the little children's ditty, Ring Around the Rosy, a pocket full of posy, ashes, ashes, we all fall down. That's based on the London plague. Ring around the rosy, you would have like a little ring around your skin, was the symptom of the disease. Posies you kept in your pocket, they believed that would ward off the disease. Ashes, ashes, all the bodies had to be cremated, burned. Okay? So, at least 20% of the population of London dead. The following year, just as the plague is finally wrapping up, later that summer, comes another event, the Great Fire of London, 1666. So this is one after the other, the plague and the fire. And this was horrific. This fire. I've got the statistics here. Uh, 13,200 homes destroyed and 87 churches destroyed, including the historic and massive St. Paul's Cathedral. And what's interesting is there was a rumor afoot blaming Catholics for having started the fire. Now we know that's not true, but it indicates that somebody did start the fire and wanted to false flagging on the Catholics. Now, who might that be? Well, it's got to be the Puritan Jewish complex. And I should mention that and this is establishment history, you can look this up, that the Jewish quarter, which was very small at the time, it was untouched by the fire. And the official story goes, because of the way the winds were blowing, the Jewish community was spared of the great fire. Almost sounds like that 9/11 deal where there's like very few Jewish names on the list. I mean, I'm just saying, but this is what happened. Boom, boom. A plague and then the fire. Both of them historic. They were remembered for centuries. That's how bad they were. So poor King Charles II has got some bad luck on his hands. Now, just because Cromwell's dead and the revolution had been suppressed, that doesn't mean that the obsession with removing the king and converting Britain into a constitutional monarchy where power is transferred to the parliament, that's still in effect. They're out to get King Charles. So in 1685, now, he was young when he became king. So in 1685, he's still just 53 years old. He dies. He begins getting sick. He has these weird symptoms, and then he has a horrific period for like a week, just immense suffering, and then finally dies suddenly. And there were conspiracy theories circulating in Britain at the time. So he's one for the Dig 'em Up series. The horrific death of the Merry Monarch King Charles. They say he was a really nice guy, down-to-earth guy. They called him the Merry Monarch. And I should mention that he was also married to a Catholic girl, princess. So that's King Charles II. Horrible, horrible death. All the earmarks of a poisoning. And then later, the death was aided by the doctors. The doctors really mistreated him. And one of the doctors, by the way, said he suspected poison. But all of these other doctors started giving him all these bizarre treatments, and they started bleeding him, get rid of the bad blood. But one way or the other, they got to him. So he was poisoned, and probably the doctors gave it an assist. And after his death, his brother, James II, becomes king. Okay? He's also married to a Catholic woman, and this was a problem not for the average Englishman, but for the Puritan remnant and certainly the Jewish community. They really hated the Catholic Church. And James II was married to Queen Mary of Modena, Italian princess. So he would be the son of King Charles, who was murdered by Cromwell, and the brother of the second King Charles, who was obviously poisoned. And not long after that, some British politicians began conspiring again with the Jews of Amsterdam to overthrow James. And William of Orange from Holland is recruited. They ask him to come and become the king. He's actually a nephew of King James, and he's married to the daughter of King James. So talk about betraying your family. So they raise up a big army. They borrow money from the Jewish moneylenders of Amsterdam, and they essentially invade England. But there's so much internal sympathies for this invading army that King James sees the writing on the wall, and he goes into exile. So it was essentially a bloodless revolution. They call it the Glorious Revolution. And there's all the ships sailing from Holland, funded by the Jews of Amsterdam, for the purpose of overthrowing King James and getting rid of this Catholicism once and for all, and installing the new king, King William and Queen Mary. William and Mary. Ever hear of William and Mary College in Virginia? That's what that is. Now, the role of the Jews in the Glorious Revolution. They were part of the Cromwell Revolution. That's quite obvious. They funded him, he gets in, and he lets them come back in. Same thing with the Glorious Revolution. And I put together here This is like an amalgamation of a few articles I found online. I like to rely on establishment sources as much as possible when I can. This way, can nobody say, "Oh, Mike King's conspiracy theorist." Well, no, this is from the Oxford University Press and also a publication called the JewishCurrents.org. And at my main web page for this series, I'm going to link all of the supporting documents. I bring receipts. You know me, okay? So this is from them, Jewish scholars, Oxford University Press, etc. The role of the Jews in the Glorious Revolution. William's army, coming from Holland, was supplied and fed by the Sephardic Jewish weapons contractors Solomon de Medina, Isaac Pereira, and Moses Machado. The whole campaign was financed with a loan of 2 million crowns from the banker Francisco Lopez Suasso, a leading shareholder in the Dutch West India Company. Suasso unconditionally placed 2 million gulden at William's disposal for his military expedition. Suasso was a big Jewish financier. The revolution secured England a Jewish community by connecting it with its center in the Dutch Republic. The Jews would find success in England's overseas trade operations, including the diamond trade. So it was already obvious at that time where Britain was destined for, this vast global commercial military empire with colonies and business dealings and holdings all over the world. So by getting into partnership with the British, that's how the Jewish cabal now would extend their own influence. Although the Jewish community of Holland was small, their money financed a regime change in England. Puritans saw themselves as a chosen people similarly to the Jews and saw commerce as important. The Glorious Revolution replaced the more absolute system of James II with a limited monarchy system. It also changed the economy from protectionist to free trade. The economic integration and military cooperation between the English and the Dutch navies that followed William and Mary's ascension would expedite Britain's status as Europe's leading colonial power, and the debt on Suasso's money would, in essence, be repaid by the enslaved and exploited peoples worldwide. And it quotes the financier Suasso. "If you are victorious, you will surely repay me. If not, the loss is mine." So the Jewish moneylenders, they had no idea that this adventure was going to be successful. But they didn't care. If they lose, they lose. They were expecting a war that they would have to finance. But it turned out, once they arrived, resistance collapsed. And William and Mary, financed by the Jewish cabal, were placed on the throne of England. And this was great for the Jewish financiers and commercial interests, because in a couple hundred years, they would own England. All right? And now that's 1690s. In 1694, William and Mary charter the Bank of England. Isn't that convenient? Coincidence? Hell no. And not only did they charter it, they were original stockholders. They're among the stockholders, along with a bunch of Sephardic Jews who had come from Amsterdam. So this is the payoff. The Bank of England. And where was the Bank of England built? It's now known as the City of London. It's the famous financial district. It's where the fire mainly occurred. And so if you juxtapose a map of the City of London upon a map of the areas destroyed by the fire years earlier, it's a perfect match. So that's the Fed of the day, established by William and Mary as payoff to the Jewish bankers who funded their ascension to the throne. The other major accomplishment of this revolution, they go hand in hand. Right? One was the ultimate empowerment of the Jewish financiers. It didn't happen instantly, but in due time it would develop. And by the time the Rothschilds come along in the 1800s, they owned the joint. But even more importantly, just as importantly, it marked the beginning of the transfer of political power from the monarchy to the parliament, the republican system. And you need to understand that this is not done for the benefit of the people, power to the people or their elected representatives. No, it's transferring power from the monarchy to corrupt parliamentarians who would later be bought up by these Jewish interests. Okay? So the big Jewish money buys up the parliamentarians, these ambitious scoundrels. They buy up the newspapers, and eventually they have taken the power away from the monarchy, not to disperse amongst the masses of the people, but for themselves. That's how that works. That's what constitutional monarchy, that's why they wanted it. That's what republicanism was all about. Take the monarch's power for ourselves under the battle cry of liberty, okay? So they were playing the game even back then. And finally, we get, this is a little bit into the next century, 1717, modern Freemasonry is established in England. So you see how the progression is working now. And the Freemasons accepted Jews amongst their members as well. And some people say that Freemasonry itself was founded by the Jewish cabal for their own purposes. Now, original Freemasonry dates back to the Middle Ages. They were like guilds that craftsmen would join. And then later on, it becomes like a social club or a fraternity. And guys will go there, they dress up, they do their rituals, they make business connections, political connections. Hey, can you get my job, son? It's a little like a college fraternity. But as the years pass, it becomes the perfect breeding ground for conspirators to penetrate the Freemasons and do their dirty work. So it's not as simple as saying all the Freemasons were bad because they were not monolithic in their ideology. Generally speaking, they were anti-monarchy, though. That kind of is a unifying feature of the Freemasons. But certainly the Jewish cabal made very, very good use, whether they began the organization or not, of Freemasonry. And that starts in 1717. So you see how everything just comes right after the other. Boom, boom, boom. The Cromwell Revolution, the Glorious Revolution, the founding of the Bank of England, and now the founding of Freemasonry. So this is the foundation. What comes later on, and we're going to get to that in the next episode with the Illuminati, is really building on this. And this is, it's not discussed all that much in conspiracy theory communities. In fact, even my books don't mention this. It's only in recent times that I really got into Cromwell and the whole revolution. I knew he was, but now I understand much better the direct connection, because the conquest of England was really the conquest of the world. And then when they got done with Britain, they dumped Britain and they took over the United States as their main hitman for the New World Order.
Now we have moved into the new age of Aquarius, ruled by Saturn. The various cults aligned with these characteristics have united with a common purpose towards globalization. Their prime target is to dominate the world's levers of power and to neutralize any opposition, especially coming from those of a spiritual disposition. In their quest for power, they pervert natural divine order by 180 degrees, turning spiritual concepts into material conquests and manipulations. They pervert the truth and history, demonizing anyone who opposes them as they twist the truth and facts in their favor. Throughout the last century, they set about undermining independent sovereign nations with communism, a Marxist Saturn cult creation to overthrow strong independent monarchs, offering the proletariat, the working classes, unrealistic promises of liberty and freedom. In reality, many millions died at the hands of the cult's henchmen as they were rounded up and penned in to a new system of control. With the cult's dishonest monetary system, each generation works harder and sinks further into debt, as much of the nation's wealth is siphoned off into the pockets of this sinister group. With this vast wealth, they have used democracy as their favored political weapon, paying off corrupt politicians who will promote and implement policies favoring their cause. Hitler referred to this hidden hand as an international clique. He was convinced they were planning to take over the whole world under a system which was contrary to Germany's survival. Being the last strong independent nation in Europe at that time, the German retaliation to the Bolshevik threat was extreme. They saw it as a last stand, a life and death struggle to which the whole nation threw its weight behind, sacrificing a whole generation and eventually the country itself. Prior to World War II, Edward VIII, a friend and admirer of Germany's stance against the Saturn cult, would not sanction another war between Britain and Germany, hoping instead for a diplomatic solution which would restrict the globalization ambitions of the cult and restore power back to the leaders and monarchs of many countries in Europe. Instead, they forced him to abdicate, using his relationship with Mrs. Simpson as a plausible excuse. With a new unprepared king who had difficulty speaking, King George was easily persuaded to do the cult's bidding during his reign in office. Churchill, another stooge and senior member of the cult, defended their island and city of London, setting the stage and foundations for the next phase of globalization. Prior to Mao's communist revolution in China, the predominant religion throughout the country was Taoism, a religion or ideology very much in tune with nature and the flow of the universe. The Taoists were known as people of the way, the same name given to early Christians who were also very much in tune with nature's rhythms and cycles. Once Mao took control, sponsored by the Saturn cult, he imposed a new religion on the country called Maoism, an atheistic ideology based around Marxism. During this transformation, around 65 million people died, many of whom would have been Taoists. In 1973, David Rockefeller, another senior Saturn cult member, wrote a piece for the New York Times. Whatever the price of the Chinese Revolution, it has obviously succeeded not only in producing more efficient and dedicated administration, but also in fostering high moral and community of purpose. The social experiment in China under Chairman Mao's leadership is one of the most important and successful in human history. Just as Churchill unleashed the Wahhabists upon the Arabs of Saudi Arabia after World War I, some elements of extreme Islam are now being unleashed on Europe via illegal immigration to weaken each nation and its communities for the final takeover by the Saturn cult using various forms of new technology.